Hey everybody, welcome back to more fun at the Red Barn as I keep chipping away on this Ferrari swapped Porsche 914. What is this, episode 90? So the real question is, and I would say place your bets now, will I get this car to start before I reach episode 100? Well, the only way that's going to have any chance of happening is if I get hard to work on this wiring. So let's see what kind of progress I can make this week. Enjoy. And as you saw in the last episode, this turn signal was not returning. It was all gooey, if you will, stuck. So I gave it a quick bath with this stuff, Deoxit D5, available on Amazon. It's a pretty little can, but and it's not cheap. It was like 17 bucks or some such. But it cleans and lubricates. It's almost like silicone. I got some on my fingers, and you can feel it leaves a bit of a residue. But the good news is, after spraying that down and playing with the switch, now when I turn the turn signal on and I rotate past and do my turn, it now self-cancels. So yay, nice quick little job done. There is the reverse switch, which will plug onto this. And then here's a little kind of a cool dealio. These are Deutsch mounting clips. So once I figure out where I want to put this thing, I don't just have to, have it flopping around in here. This side of the connector has a little slide on. I'm not going to do it because it clicks in and it's a pain to get off, but this event essentially clicks in here. But I could mount this in, might make a little tab for it, something like that, or I could maybe put it over here like this. But in any case, this keeps this part of the connector from flopping around, and then when this clicks into it, it stays nice and located. So I can route this in different ways. I left it a little bit long, but there you go. And same thing here, right? I've got this one put on. So once I figure out exactly where my lines are going to go, this will probably get a little rib nut right on there, and then that will be a completely fastened down connector. And it just tidies things up really nicely. So there's a couple different places where that's going to happen. This is the connector for the back of the 911 ignition switch. And what I've determined is I do not need all these wires. I only need 3 wires. I need something that says the key is on, and then something that says the starter is engaging. And so if you look at, it's got these, I'm just going to take them all out of here. It's got these sockets that this thing plugs onto the back of the ignition switch. Anyway, I don't want to sacrifice this thing, I guess, partly because I don't need these heavy wires. As I mentioned earlier, I have, virtually just signal going to these pins. So what I've decided to do is I've determined that I can unpin these things by desoldering them. Unsoldering. I only need 3 of these, and I'll just do this last one, see if I can get you a better view. It's very exciting to watch solder melt. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use some like 18 gauge Tefzel, which is overkill for the signal that I need. And now I've got these 3 pins. I will now, I can make this wire run, kind of as long as I need it to get to wherever I want to have that connector for the ignition switch. So that's kind of cool. Anyway, I thought you'd get a kick out of that. So I'll just get some wires connected to this and I'll be all set to go. So there are my 3 wires, and here's my wiring diagram. And I'll have green for go for 30, which is the big power wire, and 15 is the pin that is powering the run and start. So as boring as all that is, there is my setup. That's all I need for my ignition switch. So what happens is, because all the ECU needs to know is this is connecting to this, and that says things are on. And then this is the starter wire for when the key is turned into actually the start position. This will send the signal to the ECU, and then the power management unit sends the big jolt volts to the starter. But there's my ignition switch wire. All right, now testing time. So this only goes on one way, obviously. I'll say obviously because the pins have to be in the right location. And because of the ECU only needing to know when these two wires are basically connected, if you will, and I know that the yellow one is my start wire, these two simply only need to be connected when the key goes to on. So there's my key off. And so what I want to do is, when the key goes on, I should hear the tone. There's my tone. And I'm going to take it to start to make sure that this continues to be powered. And there I am in start, and I'm still getting power. Now I'm off. And now I want to be sure that, let's see, how does this work? It's going to be either one of them, but one of them is 30. Oh, I guess I do need to know this. Well, this will be interesting. I'll be able to figure it out. So with the purple connected, I'll now to my start. Well, there you go. So that means that purple is my big power wire. And just to verify that, I'll do it with green. And green and yellow into start should do nothing. And they do. My mistake. I was just reviewing some information I got online, and the big power, the always powered green, and to the starter is obviously going to go when it starts. But the other thing I just realized here is the one I was doing that secondary test on is also powered in the run and start position. So it's behaving the way it's supposed to. So I'm good to go. There's my ignition switch, you know, crazy, right? With this modern ECU stuff, we're down to like these teeny little wires, but it's just signal stuff. So that's all I need. I may end up doing the same kind of a thing here. Obviously these are the factory 911 wiper switch and turn signal switch, and they've all got these funky plugs for the harness that goes in the 911. I don't have that. So I'll be truncating these somewhere and probably not messing with anything up here because this looks all very fancy and I don't want to mess with the actual switch soldering. I may abbreviate some of this because there's a ton of this stuff that I don't need. All right, time to modify the wiring. This is the turn signal high beam switch, and I've worked out what does what. And I disassembled the harnesses, and I'm working on eliminating any wires that I don't need. And so the way this ends up working out, I'm now in test mode, because what we know with this ECU is I just need signal and signal ground for any of these functions. And so what I've done is I've worked out what is the common wire for the functions, and I've spliced them all together into just one signal ground. So I'm going to now test. I can test everything through one signal ground. And so I've got my documentation, my rough documentation over here, which will be, once it's all worked out and proven, I'll update the build documentation for the user manual that's going to have to go with this car. Anyway, so now signal ground is on. I've got my tone going. And this is in the low beam position right now. There's high beam, there's low beam. So low beam should be signal ground plus the yellow wire. So this ought to tone. And I don't know if you can hear that, but it's toning. Beep, beep. And if I go to high beam is the white wire, which is this one, and it's toned. And let's just prove out low beam doesn't do anything when it's in high, and that's right. If I go back to low, make sure high is not doing anything, and it's not. So my high beam, low beam work. Now let's test left turn, and left turn is the gray and black, which is right here. So these are my turn signal wires. So gray and black is left, so this should tone, and it does. And now cancel, and it goes off. Turn right, and it stays off. And there's my right wire, which is the gray and red. Documentation says gray and red. Turn it off, it's off. And what I didn't test was high beam flash, which is the white and red. And what I've done here is the red, I just replaced the red with this signal ground wire. So I unsoldered what used to be a red wire here. So that's white and red. It should do nothing when I turn the turn signals on. It is high beam, but it's also, it's hard to do, holding everything together and make this high beam flash thing work. But there's high beam flash. So everything's working as I expected to and wanted to, which means now I can sheathe this all up and put a Deutsch connector on the end. And we'll have a nice tidy little setup. Here is the completed turn signal high beam low beam switch with the updated wiring harness. So all DR25 sheathed, a little bit of an SCL seal here at the end, and a 6-pin Deutsch connector. Even though I'm only using 5 wires, I opted for having one empty slot in this one rather than doing a 3 and a 2 and having multiple connections under there. And then I think it's always a good idea to take some time and position the wires in the car before you do all the pinning, so you can determine exactly how you want things to route. And you can see that I've built this to go where I want it to go, right? It's going to go right around a corner under the steering column. And then I position the connector here with the mount so that when it's in the car, this will go onto one of those mounting clips that's on part of the chassis and secure this whole harness exactly how I want it. So I will go now do this to the wiper switch, and we'll be one step closer. Now I'm on to the same thing with the wiper switch. And as I first started playing with it to try to work out what wire does what, it was not making any sense. And it's interesting because you can actually see these connections and you can work out where the wires are going. And I was testing, you know, the wires, and then it was like, why is this not working? And it turns out the switch was really dirty. So I used that same spray on it. But what turns out is that spray does a great job in the beginning, but then it kind of evaporates and doesn't really do much for lubrication. So I went back to the turn signal headlight switch, and I also used this stuff here, but I just got some dielectric grease, some actual physical grease, goo grease, and you know, got it down in there and covered all the contacts. Prior to doing that, I took a little piece of wet dry sandpaper and just made sure that the contacts were all tidied up. Anyway, that made a big difference in how everything works. So now, or it's making connections, but now I need to test and document which wire is which. The red wire is going to be my signal ground because it's common to everything. So that connects up. So that's position number 1. So black and yellow should go on now. So that's position 1. And so that's position 2. Position 3 should be the red and white, and it is. This one, this purple and black, is hot in every position. I suspect that that's the park driving wire. This black wire, it's the windshield squirter. So if I pull this lever towards me, so there is my wiper switch tested and fully functioning. And so now same game. I'm going to pin it, sheath it, and put the Deutsch connector on here. And there's the heat gun cooling down, but there's the wiper switch, all sheathed, you know, pinned, sheathed, Deutsch connector, 6 wires this time, so 6-pin connector. And same kind of a thing. I don't know if you noticed when I was doing the heat shrink, I held it in the position I wanted it to be, and then there's my clip location. Sits in the car like that, so it's a totally nice, relaxed, just where I want it, kind of a little sub-harness. So there we go. Both of our switches on the steering wheel column are all set to go. And I got the switches back in, and trying to give you an idea, they're not mounted. I don't have the clips in there, but you can see now there's a little space on the dash, you know, the chassis behind the dash panel, and those will clip right in there. And then you can see that all the other harness stuff is coming up from underneath, and that'll feed through, you know, kind of in this area and plug onto those two plugs. So as this starts coming together, I'll pull the dash panel out and do all the wiring and show you exactly how that's going to look. Here's a picture of it's the same concept in the LS car. It's going to be slightly different because obviously different wiring and the whole different setup, but it's essentially going to be this kind of thing. So I'll have a nice tidy behind the dash wiring and all fully documented. I want to go ahead and get this worked out. And you can see there's a ton of extra material, so I don't need anywhere near this much. So I'm going to go ahead and trim this piece. And you can see that from the stamping, this is all about just getting this shape. So there's a bunch of distortion here that needs to be done away with. So I'm just going to slice out a bunch of this, or just cut out this main panel because I've got, you know, plenty to deal with. And I'll just tune these edges, get them nice and flat, and then get this marked on there and stitched into that dash. So as you can see, there's distortion all around this panel, and if you notice, it's wavy. And we know from looking at how this was before I cut it off that there's too much material here, right? Because when this was pushed down in here, this section that had to be pulled down had to stretch a bunch. And so it gathered material from the edges. And so there's too much material. You can see the ripples, right? Those reflections. Those are areas where there's too much material. So I'm going to use the shrinker here. And those of you who have seen this before know, but the way the shrinker works is the opposite of how the stretcher works. You can see there's 4 jaws in there. You can see as the jaws come down, or as they come together, they grab the material and they physically pull it together. And so it's gathering the material in between those jaws. The stretcher does the exact opposite. It comes down on each side and goes outboard. It stretches the material. And so I'm just going to very carefully go around this thing and shrink this to gather that material back together. The nice thing about this kind of metalwork is if you go a little too far, you can go to the other side and stretch it back out. Okay, and I do have to do a little hammer and dollying on here to get this thing back flat. You can see that because of the trauma that it's been inflicted to, I don't know if that's coming through, but this has now got a little bit of an up going this way. So I got to get this flat so it sits on the dash. So I'm just going to hammer and dolly that back into position. And so now I've just got the piece the size I want it, and I've marked where I want it to, scribed on the dash where I want to cut. So now I'll pull the dash out, cut that, and then fit this in there. And then the piece is trimmed, fit, tacked in place, and now I'm going to pull the dash out, and there's a couple of spots where it's not quite aligned just because, old parts and new parts and stamped parts and all that good stuff. So I just want to work that on the bench and get that all finished up. And after a little bit of welding and a little bit of finish work, not perfect, but it's going to be powder coated and it'll be behind upholstery. So I think it's pretty good. But there we go. It is a full-blown left-hand ignition switch, which, by the way, is an interesting piece of automotive history. Why are the Porsche ignition switches on the left-hand side? The popular belief is that it was back to the Le Mans starts where the drivers were on the other side of the track, and when they said go, they had to run to their cars, jump in and start them and go. So that as they were getting in, they could be turning the key with their left hand while putting the car in gear with their right hand and saving a teeny bit of time to get the car going. But what I understand from a very quick look on the interweb is It turns out that the cost of electrical wire was quite high at the time, and that the physical location of the switch being moved to the left used less material and was more cost effective. So do your own research. I personally like the story about the race car thing, but apparently it was because of material costs. Who knew? So anyway, a little bit of history there. And now let's go for a few style points. Those of you that may not have known how this all comes together in the end, this is the switchgear steering column cover. There are 2 more pieces that slide back in here, one from each side, once the dash is all put together, that close this off and finish the look. But this from Porsche is like it's a clamshell, top and bottom piece. And from Porsche, I think one of them was like 125 bucks, and one of them was like, I don't know, over 100. So yeah, a lot. And I ended up, this is an aftermarket company called Euro Parts. Here's the box. Euro Parts. And I just figured, you know what? I got it from Summit Racing, of all places. And I just figured for that price, you know, why not give it a shot? If it was a horrible fit or something, I can return it to Summit, you know, like instantly. I ordered it 2 days ago. Boom, here it is. But man, it's a great fit. It looks really nice. It fits well. You know, I haven't even fully attached the top. There's some fasteners that go in here, and you can see I haven't even, like I said, there's a couple that live in here. And then I have one more piece to buy, which is the horn ring, and that bolts on to these 2 locations. And it's a little copper ring that picks up this horn button, and that's how you end up getting a horn signal. There it is. The almost complete, man, this is taking a long time, but the almost complete 911 steering column. Really happy with how that's turning out. One last thing done for this episode, and that is I sheathed the sub-harness for the ignition switch. So DR25, little SCL on both ends, and a 3-pin Deutsch connector. So I'll wrap this episode and say thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and tell all your friends. And we'll talk to everybody again real soon. Not much more to go before we try to start this thing. Everybody take care. Bye-bye.